Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Bolling, along with Eboni K. Williams and Kat Timpf. We are the Fox News specialists. The deep state campaign to sabotage President Trump reaching a disgraceful new level. The leak about the so-called Comey memo alleging that President Trump asked James Comey to end the investigation into Michael Flynn should be a wake-up call to all Americans about how far these leakers will go. Of course, no one in the media has actually seen the memo yet to verify its contents, and that's just what the leakers want. Coordinate with their enablers in the mainstream media to humiliate the president at all costs. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer responded a short time ago during an off-camera meeting with reporters.
The president is very clear that the account that was published is not an accurate description of how the event occurred.
Okay, guys, let me, Kat, so the mainstream media frothing at the mouth, they're throwing out words like impeachment, like rabid dogs. Meanwhile, Comey's testified. FBI Acting Director McCabe has testified. Not once has anyone mentioned this memo until after Comey gets fired.
I'm still interested in seeing the memo. Of course, I understand the concerns. What does bother me the most is the sort of disingenuous way people are presenting this. Representative Cummings today saying that the GOP is slow-walking this. Within an hour of this news breaking, Jason Chaffetz was saying, all right, I'll subpoena this if I have to. Then after that, he's telling the FBI, I need to see all the documents relating to communications between Trump and Comey. He's saying Comey's got to come testify. Senate Intelligence Committee saying Comey's got to come testify. That's not slow walking. That is prioritizing. That is proactively launching an investigation.
You know, Eboni, James Comey was invited to testify on the Hill, a closed-door meeting on the Hill, and he turned that one down. Meanwhile, he leaked, or someone leaked this memo to the New York Times.
Yeah, Eric, I was actually surprised that Comey refused that opportunity to testify. Obviously, we know, as Kat said, Chaffetz is aggressively, I think he's almost putting out like an all-call, trying to get a hold of James Comey because he can't use his old phone number to make sure that he gets on that Hill and he testifies hopefully as early as next week so that people do have facts. We can really unpack this the way we all need to.
So on the right, everyone's saying, let's find out what the facts are. On the left, they're saying, hey, let's start the, they're ready to start the impeachment proceedings already.
So
a little premature. All right, let's meet today's specialist. She's a Fox News contributor, the 2014 recipient of the Claremont Institute's Lincoln Fellowship, and she's a senior editor at The Federalist. Great website also. But she specializes in loving Prince's B-side tracks. That's right, the music legend's less popular songs. Mollie Hemingway is here. And he was once recruited by Lou Holtz to play football at North Carolina State. He's a former Republican United States congressman from the state of Arizona and a current host on Newsmax TV, but he specializes in everything radio broadcasting. J.D. Hayworth is here as well. Mollie, I want to start with you. You wrote a great piece. If everyone hasn't read this yet, yesterday I believe it was your piece, and it's called Tips for Reading Washington Post Stories About Trump with Anonymous Leaks. Tell me about that. What do you mean?
So many of the stories that we've heard about Trump are based on anonymous leaks, and it is very important that you be a wise reader when you're presented with these things. People who leak always have motivation for leaking, and a lot of times newspapers don't do a great job of characterizing that motivation. Obviously, the leaks we're talking about right here come directly from Comey and his associates, so they have a motivation in getting that out there. That needs to be thought. You need to think through that when you're thinking about what this story really means.
You have some really wildly interesting examples. Can you give us a couple?
Well, the real problem is that so many stories based on leaks have turned out not to be true. I mean, just in the last week, we had a story based on leaks that Comey was fired after asking for more resources. Under oath, the acting FBI director said that wasn't true, that they were fully resourced and they didn't need anything else. Other people said that the deputy at DOJ had threatened to
Attorney
quit.
General
He was asked, and he said,
Rosenstein.
nope, I never threatened.
This was a big one. You remember when they said, oh, that Rosenstein threatened to quit because Donald Trump blamed him for firing Comey. You remember that? And he said, no, this was never an issue. He never threatened to quit, right?
But there's so many stories like this where people speaking off the record are able to say things and they're not held accountable when it turns out it's not true. And here, the same thing with Comey. He's put out a memo. You don't have the context. You don't understand what, you don't see what the full thing is. And even in context, it's still one side of a story. And so people should be very careful before rushing to judgment.
J.D., your thoughts?
Well, you take a look at what is happening now, and I think the tenor of our times is summed up by two words: fake news. That is what we are seeing. That, in part, is the genius of Donald Trump, because Barack Obama, on the way out the door, thought he was going to define what conservative outlets do as fake news, but instead we know it's the alphabet networks and the Washington Post and the New York Times and all the usual suspects doing their dead level best. Just think about the historical thing. Back in the day, in 1960, you had Teddy White writing The Selling of the President. In 68, Teddy White wrote The Making of the President. McGinnis wrote The Selling of the President. Now, updated for the 21st century, we've got the lynching of the president going on right now.
To be fair, we don't know that it's real, but we also don't know that it's fake.
Okay, allow me, Kat. Let's do this, guys. And I know you want to get to a floating stop, but I want to talk about this full screen. If you can get that full screen up, this is important because it plays into both what Mollie has said and J.D. have said. Look at this full screen. This is the Washington Post, the paper that Mollie was just talking about, and this is from 1 year ago, June of 2016. U.S. offers to share Syria intelligence on terrorists with Russia. All right, let me bring our co-hosts in here. Kat, this is almost the same thing they're accusing Donald Trump of doing, yet now it's a big, massive conspiracy right now. But a year ago when Obama did it, you didn't hear boo from the mainstream.
It's very clear that Republicans can't win with the Washington Post, as I was talking earlier about how aggressively Chaffetz is pursuing this and getting out ahead of this. They just came out with a piece today saying, well, Chaffetz is all of a sudden aggressively involved because it's good for his career. It's like, okay, this is clearly what you want him to be doing, and now you have a problem with that. There's obviously a bias there. You can't deny that, but it's still something you have to look at. Whenever there's allegations that are this serious, people are going to take them seriously. But taking them seriously also involves not getting out ahead of it and just screaming impeach, because there's no way to solve anything.
And Eboni, if you look at the other cable networks, they're going wall to wall with this alleged big conspiracy scandal going on with Donald Trump. And there you have it. President Obama did the exact same thing they're accusing Trump of. And by the way, we haven't even come to evidence that Trump did that.
Yeah, and this is, to Mollie's point, this issue, Eric, of motivation. It's really problematic, and it's very important because the facts do matter. I'm very gravely concerned about the ramifications of all of this stuff, but we can't even have that dialogue because we are too busy, many people, of trying to make this political, trying to make this a witch hunt about Donald Trump. For some of this stuff, for me, it's not really even about Donald Trump as much as it's about America and its safety.
Right.
One of the biggest problems, though, guys, and coming from the conservative side, is the lack of support that Donald Trump is getting from some conservatives. So it appears from the hysteria from the Democrats and mainstream media is even getting to those establishment Republicans. Listen to this.
Seen this movie before. I think it's reaching the point where it's of Watergate size and scale and a couple of other scandals that you and I have seen. It's a centipede, and the shoe continues to drop.
All right, J.D., I teed that up for you because John McCain, senator from your state of Arizona, says that this is Watergate, similar scope of Watergate. Is that insane that he's saying this?
For purposes of full disclosure, because there will be some people out there going, this is sour grapes, I finished second to John in the 2010 Republican primary for the U.S. Senate. So we got that out of the way. I think what John has done here, and to be fair, he backed off a little bit earlier today with Peter Doocy in that interview saying, no, this, there's Iran-Contra and there's Reagan. Here's the thing that's happening. The dominant media culture, the leftist media, the partisan press, knows they can go 9 times out of 10 to McCain for a quote to trash Republicans. And John has found a constituency for 5.5 years of a 6-year Senate term with the partisan Washington press corps. And then for 6 months, he'll lavish attention on Arizona and spend dough and win the primary, and he's still in the U.S. Senate. But I think there are a whole lot of people, not only in Arizona, but across the country, that have some issues with Senator McCain, and that's why you saw him back away ever so slightly today in that interview with Peter Doocy.
Eboni, Jonathan Turley, constitutional law scholar. Alan Dershowitz, a Democrat and constitutional law scholar, both said, Turley said, the Comey memo offers no proof for impeachment of Trump. Dershowitz said nobody will ever indict the president for obstruction of justice.
On these issues, yes, and I'm glad you brought it up, Eric. We're going to do a very deep dive into these legal issues in the next block. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the top of the surface is obstruction is a vague and kind of wide scope around that, what that requires, but there's some real requirements, and ultimately, we don't see a lot of evidence around it as legal people. And then there's even the defense, and this is going to be very interesting, we'll get to it again later. Does an FBI investigation even constitute a proceeding? for the legal requirements of that, because there's case law as well as the U.S. Attorney's Handbook that says it doesn't. That says the IRS and FBI investigations, while important and critical parts of this thing, are not legal proceedings for the sake of an obstruction.
But Mollie,
charge.
my concern is when you have a Republican senator actually invoking Watergate at this stage of what is going to be a long, drawn-out controversy or discussion.
What I think was actually kind of interesting about this week was the resurgence of the Never Trump Republican. They had sort of claimed that they were dying after the election of Donald Trump and that they would support him and whatnot. And what we've seen this week is that's definitely not true. The subtext of that battle is really about foreign policy. You have people who really want to continue the foreign policy that we've had under both Democrats and Republicans, and Donald Trump is a threat to that. He has exhibited a desire for more restraint in this regard. John McCain, it makes perfect sense that he would come out and sort of make a big deal about this situation because he is so opposed to Donald Trump on foreign policy, as well as there might be personal vengeance.
I don't think he's making a big deal out of it. The allegations in the memo, and of course, no one's seen the memo, and I understand that you cannot impeach based on a memo.
He compared it to Watergate, where a clear crime was committed. There was an indictment, there was a trial by jury, people pleaded guilty to clear criminal actions. That was Watergate. This is far from Watergate.
We don't know yet. I don't think that it's fair to say that I don't think it's fair to say that John McCain is saying this personally because he doesn't like Trump. These allegations are serious, and you have a right to be concerned about it.
John McCain is one of the original Never Trumpers.
Yeah, but John McCain also maybe perhaps cares about perhaps Russian influence and collusion.
Listen,
I know nothing's been found yet, but these are serious things, and concerns are very understandable.
But the comparison is the problem. To Eric's point, real quick, when McCain makes a Watergate comparison, though, Kat, that kind of takes the wind out of what I think is otherwise a legitimate argument about the context and gravity of what we are talking about here. And so because the facts of Watergate were so different, and we talked about this with Pat Buchanan sitting right here to my right, and we can, reasonable minds can see the distinctions.
John McCain's a smart man. Why would he compare Watergate to this? And it's a very, very early time to be doing this. There's been nothing. There's been no trial. There's been no accusations, even with the exception of the mainstream media.
Because it gets a headline, and here we are talking about it. And that's the sad fact. A lot of guys in Washington, John has a distinguished record, but now it's come down to how do I get attention and how do I make news today?
I think
certainly don't think it's fair to say that he's making these comments for attention.
I think he realizes that Donald Trump came in and said, I'm going to drain the swamp. John McCain, like him or not, Republican or not, he's one of these swamp creatures, and I will tell you that there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle who would rather have Donald Trump not in office than have him draining that swamp.
But McCain, I think, could also legitimately have questions around what's going on with this investigation, also have these foreign affairs, national security concerns and policy distinctions around Trump as well, which, you can add those together, and I think that's why he's talking about it.
There's a new story coming out every day. I think that's what he was saying. It's growing and growing and growing, and so that's why he's concerned.
But not Watergate. After news of the Comey memo, Democrats and the mainstream media threw out all credibility out the window, reckless, throwing around what apparently is their new favorite word, impeachment.
And this is where I stand. I will not be moved. The president must be impeached.
I think this is going to put us a little bit further on our way to what I've been calling for so long, and that is impeachment.
If these allegations, Senator, are true, are we getting closer and closer to the possibility of yet another impeachment process?
Reluctantly, Wolf, I have to say yes, simply because obstruction of justice is such a serious offense.
You've got a series of allegations. What would it take for that pattern to be an impeachable offense?
I was in the Nixon administration, as you know, and I thought after watching the Clinton impeachment, I thought I'd never see another one. But I think we're in impeachment territory now for the first time.
All right, Mollie, I'm going to go and suggest that if the Republicans were foolish enough to even go up this avenue, you may be looking at Donald Trump as the last Republican president, maybe in our lifetime.
It's madness to be having this kind of talk. It's one thing to have Democrats or the media go into this alternate reality where you're going to unseat a democratically elected president. It's entirely another for Republicans to actually join in on that. And if they think that the net effect of that would be somehow to improve their standing, it's it's madness. I mean, I would really hope that no Republican is actually thinking that.
2 quick points on this. The first is that there were actually some Democrats today, one of our congressmen here in New York, John Crowley, who said the only I word he's interested in right now, Eric, is information and investigation. Yeah. Also, Claire McCaskill saying she is a prosecutor by nature and she wants to see evidence. So I don't think it's fair to categorize all Democrats as being ready to chop off Trump's head. Some people do want to see facts.
Just let me make this point very quickly, mindful of the time. It's the timing. Got to look ahead to the midterms in 2018. Democrats want this to marinate. They want it to look like they're being sobered. Look, they think they can make gains if they can keep Republicans delayed, drag this thing out, and then start thinking about it. Well, about time for the midterms. That's what's going on. It's political timing.
Kat, final thought?
I don't. Everything is political because we're talking about politics. When you're talking about something as serious as being alleged in this memo, of course, people are going to be thinking about it. Of course, people are going to want to look into it. And of course, people are going to have concerns when so many news stories keep coming out every day. There's no fire yet, but there's a lot of smoke. You don't just sit comfortably in a smoky building because you haven't actually seen fire. You start to get a little worried.
Okay, we'll leave it right there. Are the left's obstruction of justice allegations against President Donald Trump a huge legal overreach? We're debuting a brand new segment, The Docket. That's coming up next. And be sure to follow us on social media at Specialist FNC on both Twitter and Facebook.
We're debuting a brand new segment called The Docket, and obviously a huge story coming out of Washington about the implications of the Comey memo, and specifically what it all means, the big legal questions. And the big one burning right now is, can there be a charge of obstruction of justice against the sitting United States president? Okay, so I want to break all of this down a little bit before we go into the very needed political discussion. So the short answer is yes, around obstruction of justice. It can happen, but it's very, very difficult. And people have been talking about this in a way recently that makes it seem like it's easy to do, and it's really not. What's required, I want to tell you the code. It's U.S. Code Section 1505. And it really talks about the requirement. It's a specific intent requirement. And that's important to note because unlike a general intent requirement, so for example, it would not be enough if Trump were to have said what he allegedly said to Jim Comey, and it was suggestive, and even if it ended up thwarting this investigation against General Flynn, that's still not enough. It must be made with specific intent, meaning that he specifically said it for the sole purpose of shutting down this Flynn investigation. And anything short of that, you don't have what you need for obstruction. And then going back to what I mentioned in the first block, it might all be for nothing because, again, is an FBI investigation even a legal proceeding for the sake of 18 U.S.C. 1505? So let's start with there. Let's bring it up to the panel now. This obstruction charge, Mollie, do you think that people are even looking at it this deeply at this point, or has this become a political talking point?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the central conceit of this claim, based on anonymous sources, is that what Trump did was serious enough to lead to impeachment, but not serious enough to do anything about it unless Comey was fired. That seems pretty weird. And when we have people under oath giving testimony saying there was no obstruction of justice, and we have all these comments to the contrary, it seems very bizarre. I'll just point out also that if this is obstruction, we have evidence of the previous administration saying similar things, actually even in a wider format, more public format, saying like there's no scandal at the IRS or Hillary is fine, she's going to be fine. Clearly indicating what President Obama's desire was with those investigations in ways that almost matched completely with what Comey himself ended up saying. So if this is obstruction, well, that would be clearly obstruction.
Eric, I want to get your thoughts on this. Let's pull up the full screen now because let's talk about what was allegedly said in this memo, because this is what they're going to want to look like. When you've got people from Chaffetz to McCaskill and people saying they want to hear from Comey specifically, this is what they want to analyze. This quote, "I hope you can let this go. Hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, letting Flynn go." Eric, if it's accurate.
Can I ask you on your definition of intent? That sounds like the intent would be to, yeah, hey, Flynn's my friend. If this were true, if the note is accurate or the leak is accurate, hey, he's a good guy. You know, you should let him go. Or you know, can we get on with business? Is that enough intent to call for obstruction of justice?
So that's what we call in the law arguable. So if I'm representing the president and this actually got to an impeachment hearing, you're going to say no. You're going to say that was suggestive. You know, he was saying in general, and we know Comey allegedly said, I do think he's a good guy. So that's not strong enough for that
intent. The difference between did he say, oh, I really hope, or, you know, I really hope that you know, again, memo, nobody's even ever seen it, but that's the argument, right? Was he just throwing it out there saying, oh, well, I hope, or if he was saying, well, I hope, meaning I sure hope so, you better.
Yeah. I just want to back up the question with, okay, so we're going to have to get this note, right?
Yes, we're going to have to see it.
But here's the other question. The mainstream media and people on the left and Democrats and even some Republicans are saying, I want to see the note. But are they demanding? James Comey allegedly took copious notes, right? That's the
what he's saying. Yes.
Well, I want to see Obama, the notes that he wrote after he met with Obama or Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton. I'd like to see all those notes and say,
for context?
well, for context, yeah. So if you're going to say obstruction of justice in that respect for Trump, you better hold those other lawmakers at the same standard, and maybe they all get. Go on trial.
I hear you, Eric. I'm going to let you get in here 1 second, J.D. Just to that point, I want us to be careful about going down this road because at this point, we're not talking about Obama. And I think President Trump has a vested and important political interest in making this very plainly about him.
Other than that, you could say, oh, you know, presidents do this all the time.
No, I hear you, and I don't think anyone
And by the way, if you're so
that.
copious note-taker, let's see the rest of them, too.
I'm not a lawyer, never played one on TV. Counselor, I appreciate what you're telling us about intent.
Yes.
But let me tell you what the real intent is. It goes back to politics. The notion is we have an act of political arson going on in this country by the dominant media culture allied with the left. And they are doing everything they can to use these buzzwords, obstruction of justice. All of this is designed to take down Donald Trump. It's just plain and simple. The facts of the law are not going to be argued. The headlines and the sensationalism and the attacks are what they're trying to use to carry the day.
You might be right.
Oh, I am right,
I know
Kat.
that the media I know that the media hates Donald Trump. I think that a lot of the hysteria this entire time has been incredibly overblown. But at the same time, if I even suggest that perhaps it could be true, people on the Trump side go after me and say I'm so stupid and I hate the president and I should get out of the country. So there's a little bit of hysteria on both sides of the coin. I completely believe that you could be correct, but I also completely believe that there's no way for us to know that yet. And the best thing for our country is to let's get the memo, let's look at it, let's investigate it, and to Republicans' credit, that is what Republicans are doing, and Democrats are being unfair to say that they're not doing it.
It's an extemporaneous memo. That's all this is. This isn't a tape, or it could be a
exactly.
Guys, it could be a flawed recollection by James Comey is what my point.
So that's a good point. I want to close with this. That's exactly why, in addition to the memo itself, if it does exist, they need him to testify. Because when he's up there in front of that committee, they're going to be looking to read, do they believe him? Is he credible? Why say it now and not before? All of those things, Eric, will be considered.
When did you write the note, Jim?
They're going to ask them all those questions.
After 3 drinks, after 3 cocktails?
They're going to ask them all of that and authenticate it and talk about that to determine the intent behind it. All going to be very interesting. A violent brawl breaking out in the streets of Washington, D.C. between protesters and security for Turkey's president. New details on how this happened right after this. Stay with us.
In our What Is Even Happening segment today, an unbelievable altercation on American soil. According to reports, protesters were pummeled by Turkish President Erdogan's security detail, all because they were carrying the flag of a Kurdish political party outside the Turkish ambassador's residence in Washington. 9 people were hurt and 2 arrests were made. President Erdogan was reportedly in the building at the time. Yeah, okay, so this happened around the same time, of course, that Erdogan was meeting with President Trump. Should we start blaming this violence, more violence due to President Trump, right? I'm joking. This is insane. This is an insane fight.
What you're seeing here, and this is one of the things, when you talk about a dangerous world, pardon the pun, it's time to talk Turkey. Because you've got a situation now with Erdogan as the leader of Turkey. You see how this nation has changed, and not for the better. Kemal Ataturk in the early 20th century made this a secular Islamic republic in essence and brought it into the 20th century. But now in the 21st century, Erdogan is coming back to embrace Islamic fundamentalism. It creates a lot of problems, and there is always the dilemma with the Kurds. Now, for the Trump administration, Erdogan's the head of state. Turkey is part of NATO, although I have heard some observers say that we've got a real ticklish situation with Turkey as part of NATO and this conflict going on, the change in the government there, and continued mistreatment and hostility toward the Kurds. It's a real problem.
Yeah. Mollie, do you think this reflects anything larger, or do you think this was just a fight?
Well, I mean, it's just so frustrating. Under Erdogan, he has been taking that country into a much more authoritarian direction.
Yes.
They have huge violations of civil liberties. They do not have freedom of the press. They don't have freedom of assembly. That's one thing to be doing that in their country. It is entirely another thing to be doing it here. It's completely unacceptable, and it's frustrating because these people have diplomatic immunity because they were the bodyguards of Erdogan, and so we need to get them out of the country as soon as possible. We need to limit their entry, and we need to let them know that that kind of behavior is unacceptable on U.S. soil.
It almost looked like a movie scene. I thought it was, at first I thought it was in Turkey, and then like, wait a minute, this is in D.C. I was blown away that was a D.C. video. Here's the real kicker here, though. Turkey wants to become part of the European Union, right? And so now they're trying to get into that, yet they have this policy, you know, those free borders. ISIS, we know for a fact, we've tracked ISIS fighters stealing oil from Iraq and driving it right into Turkey and selling the oil into Turkey. So if Turkey wants to be part of the EU and then have an absolute wide open border for ISIS to walk into their own country, and also, J.D., you're 100% right, the only one really fighting ISIS on that border, that Iraq-Syria border, are the Kurds. The Kurds are the ones who are putting up the fight. We're supporting the Kurds. So now we have this situation where we support the Kurds financially, military financially, and Turkey's fighting the Kurds as well, but the Kurds are the only one fighting ISIS. This is why I would agree with Kat on some things about there are places that we need to stay out of those fights.
Well, and we have to understand, again, ethnicity, tribalism, rather than traditional national sovereignty. This all comes into play. But you have a situation, just a little different footnote. I will tell you, on a visit to Turkey pre-9/11, I remember being at a dinner on the Straits of the Bosphorus there with the Turkish detail. We had a guy who was basically protecting my wife and me, 6'7", moved like a cat, and when you need protection in an uncertain situation, the Turks provided protection when we were there. It in no way sanctions what we saw here on our soil. Mollie is quite right, but every once in a while you can flip the paradigm and say, it's good to have some security guys, and the Turks are tough people, which makes this a tough
Eboni,
situation.
I want to get you in here. What did you think watching this video?
I mean, obviously, it's horrific to see that. To Eric's point, in our soil, no less. I mean, this is not something you expect to see here. And it just kind of awakens this cultural disconnectedness to me, you know, where Turkey wants to get in the EU, that there's this going on there, but then you bring this essentially to our front door, and it's a real problem. So I think maybe Turkey needs to really figure out consistently how they want to show up in the world and be consistent about it.
And the basis for this fight was that it was a peaceful, at the time, it was a peaceful protest against the United States helping out the Kurds.
Absolutely.
And look at how they react, J.D. I understand you want tough Turks to guard it,
but the Kurds.
It's supposed to be a peaceful protest.
Right, we do business differently.
Remember,
exactly.
right. And remember what Washington said, we have no permanent allies, we have no permanent adversaries, we instead have permanent interests as Americans.
Okay, fair enough.
That's what we have to remember.
All right, well, one of President Obama's most controversial final acts coming to pass today, Chelsea Manning walking free from prison 28 years early. The message it's sending to leakers everywhere right after this.
All I do is win, no matter what. Got money on my mind, I can never get enough. And every time I step up in the building, everybody hands go.
Welcome back to the Fox News Specialists. Our specialists today are Mollie Hemingway and J.D. Hayworth. Let's continue the conversation. Ready for this one? Chelsea Manning is now officially free from prison today, being let out 28 years early. 28 years early, all thanks to a commutation from President Obama, and her supporters have raised more than $150,000 for her to re-enter into society. And now, if that's the going rate for leakers these days, we are doomed. We'll start in this and work our way around, J.D.
You know what gets me, and the funding issue is actually the side thing to me. What is astounding is that this person is still could take Army funds. You know, I got to say, Sergeant Manning is very fortunate you had a President Obama instead of a President Eisenhower. Had Ike been president, let me tell you, this person would have taken a ride on old Sparky, because what this person did was treason. It is horrific. It is horrible. And to see this person waltz out with this huge bit of change, no less, and still be eligible for funds when I've got veterans, when I was a member of Congress, having to do constituent work to make sure guys who lived up to their responsibilities and their duties could even get VA care, and we have this guy waltzing out with this kind of money and this situation. It is despicable.
This gal walked in, this guy walked out, this gal. I'm sorry, Kat, your thoughts?
Well, to be fair, first of all, might not end up getting the benefits depending on what happens with the appeal. If you're convicted in military court, what happens that you are on active duty until everything's worked out with the appeals process. So we will see what happens. Chelsea Manning served 7 years. That 35-year sentence is more than murderers, rapists, spies receive. The information that Chelsea leaked showed detainee abuse. It showed that the civilian casualties in the Iraq war were probably a lot higher than officials were telling us that they were. She saw wrongdoing, she exposed it, she served time for what she did, and I think it's absolutely good, a great thing now that she's free, because the sentence was absolutely too harsh compared to the crime. Absolutely.
No way.
Absolutely.
She should still be sitting in a jail cell for
Why?
the rest
Is she a threat at all? Why?
She committed treason as far as I'm concerned, and I will tell you, we have gotten in a situation in our society where we are so permissive, where we try to talk things down when they are direct actions taken against our country and our national security. We just better rethink where we are as a nation if we want to endure as a nation.
7 years in prison is no joke.
Let me talk to you about this, Eboni. Now, Chelsea Bradley Manning was convicted of spying and theft. Court-martialed, got 35 years, spent 7. Acquitted of the more severe charge of aiding the enemy, which would have been a capital offense, which would be punishable by death, but beat that charge, but still is convicted. In court-martial, President Obama said, you know what, I'm pulling the conviction.
Yeah, the legal implications here are huge. I mean, I think Kat and what J.D. are going back and forth with are both legitimate things around this notion of, and this is the big question when it comes to leaks these days, and they're everywhere. Do the ends justify the means? And I think that's ultimately kind of the question we all kind of have to kind of look within ourselves to find out. I think in this case, she did escape this big capital offense, but she was convicted of these much heavier charges. Not to be a stickler here, but it is under appeal, as Kat points out. And ultimately, if that appeal doesn't go her way, she will not be allowed to get those benefits that you're very right, J.D. These VA veterans and things should have exclusive to their service. So I think we have to see how the appeal process goes. But ultimately, the content she gave us, Kat, you're absolutely right, very valuable. But does it justify the way in which she went about it?
So, Mollie, at the end of the president's term, he decides whose sentences he's going to commute and for what reason. Your thoughts on why President Obama may have commuted Chelsea Manning's sentences?
Well, and it is important to note that it was a commutation of the sentence. He didn't pull the conviction. But mostly what I'm kind of confused by is all this mixed messages we're getting about both WikiLeaks and in whose judgment it is wise to share information. So in Manning's case, the information that was stolen and released to WikiLeaks, I mean, I think it's worth remembering, it was to WikiLeaks, was showing all this wrongdoing, and that was the judgment that was made. We have this week President Trump, in a fight against terrorism, in his judgment, sharing information, and we're being told by Democrats that this is an impeachable offense. And at the same time, we're being told that WikiLeaks, any association with WikiLeaks is also an impeachable offense. And I would just like to see some consistency here for people who are praising Chelsea Manning's release while condemning.
And we need to point out, J.D., that a lot of people were looking for that treason charge that goes with it, a death sentence.
Well, we have to decide as a people. When you take an oath to the military, are you there to support and defend the Constitution and the people you wear the uniform for? I got to tell you, this ends justify the means situation in the case of Sergeant Manning is a very,
Kat,
very troubling.
Absolutely weigh in on this, but a lot of people think that spying is tantamount to murder.
There is not a single example of anybody losing their life because of what Chelsea Manning did. This has been investigated extensively, and there's not a single example of anyone losing their life because of what Chelsea Manning did.
But Kat, I think question, if there was an example of that, would that change the analysis for you? Because I think that's where a lot of people are stuck, right? Because we can't say that what you do actively should be quantitated around the result, because it's the action she took that we have to, judge her on.
But people do say that. People do try to say that people died because of what Chelsea Manning did.
We don't have any evidence
didn't
of that.
happen.
Yeah, sure.
There's no evidence of it.
Right. We're going to leave it right there. A petition threatening to boycott ABC for canceling Tim Allen's Last Man Standing show, hitting 250,000 people. And now, Tim Allen speaking out. Don't go away.
Backlash is growing against ABC and its cancellation of the Tim Allen comedy Last Man Standing. Some conservatives are vowing a boycott of the network, alleging it pulled the plug on the show due to his right-of-center point of view.
Wow. Hillary Clinton's asking us for money. Will her string of mistakes never end?
The hits keep on coming, but she'll never top Benghazi. That's her stairway to heaven.
Yeah, it's the kind of screw-ups that happen when you spend all your free time deleting emails.
It's not a mistake. I donated to Hillary. I think it's time.
Well, I think it's time to pierce my broken heart with this knife.
Mom, I know you love the show Scandal, but do you really want to watch it every night for 4 years?
An online petition demanding the show's return already has more than 250,000 signatures. Tim Allen is tweeting out in response to the uproar, writing, quote, "Stunned and blindsided by the network I called home for the last 6 years." Right. I've never seen the show particularly. Huge Tim Allen fan, though. I've watched enough Home Improvement that I definitely know how to send myself to the hospital building a shed. For sure. Have any of you ever seen this show? I know that it was really popular. It was second ratings just below Modern Family.
Yeah, tons, like over 8 million people watched it. And when I first saw the story, Kat, I had a little concern, is this, a political thing? But then you have to look at the statement by ABC Entertainment President Shannon Dungy. She went on to say that basically she canceled this show for the same reason she canceled several others, Dr. Ken, The Catch, American Crime, none of which you would argue were conservative by any stretch, just because she's taking comedies off Friday. And she's kind of doing some changes in the lineup. So I think before we jump to conclusions around the right-wing conspiracy, then we have to look at
the only problem with that theory, and she may be taking comedies off Friday, then put it somewhere else. If it's rating the way it's rating, as Kat points out, put it somewhere else. But it's a well-known, obvious, it's common knowledge that Hollywood is anti-conservative. And we had Stacey Dash used to be on this saying that she's blackballed because she's a conservative. Antonio Sabato Jr. will tell you the same thing. John Voight, Stephen Baldwin, a friend of mine, they'll tell you if you're conservative in Hollywood, you're not going to work.
But John Voight still works, though. And that's the thing. Like, there are conservatives that still work. Clint Eastwood still works. I mean, he's highly sought after. So I think sometimes you have to accept that maybe these people aren't that talented. Maybe their time is come and gone.
Tim Allen is incredibly. Have you seen the Santa Claus, Ebony?
Not Tim Allen. Not Tim Allen. He's great.
The man's
He's
a star.
Friend of ours. Come on.
And the other thing, as a broadcaster, when you hear that C word, cancellation, I mean, it's a fact of life in television. It happens. But this situation, look, Disney ABC is not what Walt Disney had when he would run to get Disneyland built. He did a deal with ABC way back in the 50s. Things have changed. There is a political motivation behind this, but
how do we know that, J.D.? How do we know that?
Because the aura of Hollywood. But the bottom line is, we've seen other successful shows go in the 1970s. CBS changed everything, said the network was too rural. Goodbye to Green Acres and Petticoat Junction. Hello to All in the Family. Maybe that worked, but Dr. Frank Stanton said no, and Bill and Babe Paley
Mollie,
said
what do you think?
Rural.
You think that we can determine anything for sure? It's kind of up in the air.
Well, I think what's unfortunate about this is, for fans of this show, this was a very civil show.
Yes,
it presented conservative viewpoints, but it also presented liberal viewpoints, and it had people talking with each other. And this is something that we're lacking in our culture right now, and it's very bad to not have shows where people can demonstrate that you can disagree politically and still be a tight family or get along with your neighbors. And that's something that I wish more media would model.
Exactly, and that's why I think the fact that it wasn't canceled in isolation just doesn't, for me, it's not convincing that it was politically motivated. I mean, Dr. Ken, that's like a super, like, all-inclusive, diverse, globalism type of show, yet they got the X too.
Right, all right. Well, Tim Allen, you are a star. If you're watching, I love you.
Tim Allen's great.
Okay, don't go away. We circle back with our specialists, J.D. Hayworth and Mollie Hemingway, right after this.
Now it's time to circle back with our specialist, Mollie Hemingway and J.D. Hayworth. Okay, so J.D., you're from the second best school in the state of North Carolina, NC State University.
Bless you. This is so good. Look at the counselor. She is wearing Wolfpack red.
I wore it especially for you. I wanted you to feel like this was a safe, welcome space for you, J.D.
I'm very glad.
Here's my question. You play football for the Wolfpack for a second, almost. What position? I'm dying to know what position.
Well, Lou Holtz recruited me as right tackle. I ended up left out. but with some health problems, had a chance to get more into radio and to student government. I was student body president my senior year, and at that point in time, the South was still pretty solidly Democratic. I was the only Republican on the Board of Trustees at NC State.
Look at you.
A few years back.
Bringing everybody together. Eric, any questions?
So, Molly, one of my daily consumption of news in the morning, I go to Drudge, I go to the Wall Street Journal, I go to Media, I go to IJR, love those guys as well. I've been reading the Federalist because of you. Tell me about the Federalist. Why should I read that every day?
Yeah, we started it about 3.5 years ago, and we like to publish conservative and libertarian commentary, particularly libertarian commentary that cares about virtue. We cover politics, policy. We have a ton of female readers and writers, and we are doing great.
Big fan.
Thank
Big
you.
fan. New fan.
Absolutely. Yeah, Molly, when you're going through all these Washington Post stories and all the leaks that's not turned out to be true, do you think that people will stop to trust the Washington Post or stop trusting the Washington Post? Or do you think that people kind of want to hear these things about Trump?
I think what's unfortunate, is that you have a very divided public. So people who hear what they want to hear from the Post are going to just believe whatever is reported. Credibility for the media in general is actually bad, not just for the Post, but for everybody, with Republicans and with conservatives. I mean, I read a poll that just came out that showed that only 11% of Republicans believe that the national media can be trusted to cover the news accurately. That's actually a crisis. And the fact that the media aren't doing what they need to do to regain that credibility is just, it's amazing to me. They should have learned from 2016 to improve.
Hot topic.
Thank you to our Fox News specialists today, J.D. Hayworth and Mollie Hemingway. And thank you all for watching. Make sure you follow us on social media at Specialist FNC on both Facebook and Twitter. And remember, 5 o'clock will never be the same. Special report up next.